This is a 2017 Mercedes-Benz G550 4x4 squared. It costs around $250,000, which is double the price of a regular Mercedes G-Wagen. And it's lifted way off the ground, so it has double the off-roading abilities of a regular G-Wagen. And today, I've borrowed this one from a viewer here in Virginia, so I can show you why it's double the insane of a regular G-Wagen. Of course, I'm going to demonstrate that in a minute by driving the G-Wagen 4x4 squared, and you can read all of my thoughts on the driving experience if you click the link below to read my review on autotrader.com/oversteer. But right now, I'm going to take you on a little tour and show you all of the crazy quirks and weird features that make the G-Wagen 4x4 squared so unusual, even when it's just sitting still.
First, a quick overview. The G550 4x4 squared uses the same engine from the regular G550, a twin-turbo V8 with 416 horsepower and 450 pound-feet of torque. It's officially available in the United States, but you might never see one. Production numbers likely won't top 300 or so for the entire country. The interior is the same as a standard G-Wagen, but all the other stuff, well, you'll see. Oh, and sorry about that little smudge on the lens.
Now, the craziest thing you instantly notice about this vehicle is, obviously, its height. I am 6'3". I'm not a short person, but this is not a short vehicle. Next up, here's a comparison with this thing and my Range Rover. This is not some tiny little crossover. This is a full-size SUV, and people always give me crap for driving something so big. Well, it ain't so big now. Look at the difference in mirror height. Look at the difference in roof height. And maybe the craziest thing, when you open the Range Rover's door, the middle of it barely reaches the G-Wagen's running boards. The 4x4 squared is enormous. In fact, it's 20 inches taller than a Range Rover. But the Range Rover is the wrong vehicle to use for a demonstration of the G-Wagen's height. For a better comparison, this is a G-Wagen 4x4 squared. This is a public school bus. Their hoods are at the same level. That means when you're driving this, your driving position is roughly the same as when you're driving this. In case you think I'm lying about the driving position, here it is next to one of these flat front buses. The G-Wagen 4x4 squared's hood comes up to this bus's windshield. When you're driving this thing, you'll basically be chatting it up with fire engine drivers, school bus drivers, garbage truck drivers, although I don't think you'll have a lot in common. Now, speaking of gargantuan size, you can't talk about height and not mention width. The standard G-Wagen is only 69.5 inches wide, which is narrower than a Ford Focus. But to create the G-Wagen 4x4 squared, they had to add over a foot of width to this vehicle. The result, this one is 82 inches wide, which makes it wider than a Ford Raptor. Another crazy thing about this vehicle is the ground clearance. Mercedes-Benz has lifted this thing off the road using something called portal axles, which I'll get to in a second. Right now, the important thing to understand is a Ford Raptor, the off-road muscly pickup truck, has 9.3 inches of ground clearance. This thing has 18 inches, double a Ford Raptor's ground clearance. What exactly does 18 inches of ground clearance entail? Well, let me demonstrate. You can't do that in a Ford Raptor. Another interesting thing about this vehicle is the bumper situation. Now, when Mercedes-Benz lifted the entire G-Wagen body, they obviously lifted the bumper itself, and the result of that is that the normal bumper on this car doesn't really conform to the bumpers on any other vehicles that were getting in an accident. So, in order to sell this in the United States, Mercedes-Benz had to fit this tiny little aluminum-looking bumper all the way on the bottom. It's the lowest point in the car, and it kind of looks like a weird afterthought bumper. And then there are the fenders. Now, in order to jack this thing up and make it all off-road ready, Mercedes had to stick a bunch of suspension components down there, which involved widening the vehicle. And so the tires came out from the body and they needed some fenders. The interesting part of this decision was Mercedes decided to make the fenders out of carbon fiber. Now, that may seem like a sort of a cool thing, carbon fiber fenders, except you're driving along and this wheel kicks up some rocks and then bam, it goes right into your carbon fiber fender. I can only imagine what these giant carbon fiber fenders cost to replace. Now, one of the things you'll quickly realize with the height situation in this vehicle is that stepping inside is no longer especially easy. Let me demonstrate. You open the door and then look at this. This is 18 inches you got to step over. It's not the easiest thing in the world. The front is hard, but Harder yet is the rear. Let me show you. You open the back door, and you'll notice not only do you have to climb over 18 inches, but the space to get in is much smaller because of the giant rear fender and because there's just not all that much legroom in this thing. Not only that, you have to climb over 18 inches, and then you have to climb even higher to get into the back seat. Most importantly, you don't want to put your hand on the extremely expensive carbon fiber fender because you don't want to break it. So climb inside. You don't want to put your hand there. You got to get yourself up. Oh, climb even further, and now I'm in. Not so bad, but now getting out, I can't put my hand there, so I just got to kind of leap. The height also creates a problem if you're trying to load stuff in. In modern cars, people complain if they have to lift a package above their knees in order to get it in the car. And this thing, you have to lift it above your waist. Look at this. This is an eye level for short people. Now, the interesting thing is, once it's here, it's actually a little bit easier to get out than a normal car because this is right here, boom. But getting it in the first place, not especially easy. Now, one of the interesting things you'll notice about this vehicle when you first see it is all of the lights. The front end is generally the same as a regular G-Wagen, but look up here. You have these orange marker lights in front that turn on whenever you turn on the headlights. And in back, you have the same setup, the same grouping of lights, except they're red, and they come on every time you turn on the headlights. I assume this is to warn people that you're coming in a vehicle that is incredibly tall. Semi-trucks have lights like these. Now, the most interesting part are these. These are little LED lights, like the running lights up front. Unfortunately, the federal government decided apparently that Mercedes-Benz was not allowed in the US market to turn on the LED lights, presumably because it would blind birds or something. Anyway, the point is you can't turn them on at all. They're just there. In foreign markets they come on, but not here. And one other interesting thing about the light panel on the roof, it's made out of carbon fiber, which is weird because it just faces forward. It's kind of susceptible to rock chips. Also, susceptible to rock chips. Those fenders again, in the front, they also face forward, and the carbon fiber is right here. Could easily get hit by a rock that's kicked up from another vehicle. Now let's talk about the portal axles, which is one of the reasons this vehicle is able to be lifted so high off the ground. Now, when a normal guy just lifts his truck, he usually just does the suspension, leaving the axles where they are, and then they become the lowest point on the vehicle. Not in this case. In this case, they've done the suspension, which lifted it up, but they also moved the axles. Now, in a normal vehicle, the axles are right in the middle of the wheel. That makes the most sense. The wheels turn and the axles are right in the center. In this car, the portal axles actually lift up above the center of the wheel for extra ground clearance. Tremendously expensive solution, but it gives the thing probably 6 extra inches of ground clearance. It's amazing to look at. Now, that's why I was able to climb underneath it. There's absolutely nothing encumbering this car since the axles have been moved out of the way of any objects. This thing has so much ground clearance, you could probably drive over a fire hydrant and not damage it. Another thing I love about this car, not unique to the 4x4 squared, but all G-Wagons, is the basketball hoop cup holder. Allow me to explain. Now, the G-Wagen came out back in the 70s before people were putting cup holders in cars. When they modernized it later for the US market, they needed to add a cup holder, and so for the front, they added this thing. Look at that. Look at that. Look at this cup holder and tell me it does not look exactly like a basketball hoop for tiny basketballs. Unfortunately, it is a cup holder, and this is the only front cup holder in the G-Wagen. So that's most of the insanity, but not all of it. For the rest, I have to climb inside and get out on the road in this thing, a $250,000 German-built monster truck. All right, time to drive the 4x4 squared. Oh boy. We seem very high. Does anybody else notice that? Yeah, there's some wind noise. You know, at the end of the day, this vehicle was never intended to be lifted another 10 inches off the ground. So there's some compromises. One of them is steering. The steering, it doesn't feel tremendously direct. Now, I do feel like I own the road. I really feel like everybody should simply be moving out of the way for me to experience how the road as I wish to experience it. Quite a bit of wind noise, yeah, it's quite interesting. We don't have a window down or anything. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I guess the aerodynamics of this car were always a little bit suspect, and when it then raises up, you get even more of that. There's definitely body roll when you go into corners, which is actually kind of funny because the regular G-Wagen is pretty composed, but this one is designed more for suspension travel and off-roading, and so that's something you have to put up with if you're going to drive it frequently on the roads. The benefit of the body roll is there's an enormous amount of suspension travel, so if I wanted to, I could run over that camera. Such an interesting vehicle to drive. The steering, for a new car, it has quite a vague steering situation. Yeah, so when you come to a full stop at a light, it stops and then it kind of rocks back and forth a little bit. The other interesting thing is the car feels narrow when you're sitting in it, but actually if you glance in your mirrors, you see the fenders and you remember, oh, by the way, don't forget, I got 6 inches on either side of me I gotta account for if I'm gonna park into a tight space or something. It has some pickup, which is possibly terrifying. I mean, I don't know that I really need pickup in a vehicle that's 18 inches off the ground. It's probably not a good thing. It is incredible how much higher we are than this car. This is an SUV. I'm driving past a Ford Escape. That is unbelievable. I am looking down on them, Raptor. Laughable. Cute. That guy brought his Raptor out today. He probably thought he was really special. This is his Sentra we're coming up to now. It looks like that's unbelievable. I can see his entire roof. The driving position is amazing in this car. Hey, look at this. That's a RAV4. That's not a small car. You know, my Range Rover, I'm a little taller than these things, and I look at them and I think, oh, you know, they're small crossovers. In this vehicle, it's like I'm driving a monster truck on the road, except then I look at the interior and it's like hand-stitched everywhere, beautiful leather, carbon fiber surround on the instrument panel. It's incredible, it's unbelievable. All the, you know, I've been feeling this Alcantara steering wheel, the Mercedes logo right in the front. This is one of the most unbelievably interesting driving experiences that I've ever had. You have a combination of sort of this vagueness that you associate with a lifted pickup. You have the luxury that you associate with a Mercedes-Benz, and you have this steering position that I've only ever gotten when I've driven, I drove a U-Haul when I moved to Philly. It was kind of like that. This is incredible. I can see I'm sitting behind a Volvo XC90. I can see over it, and then I can see to the next car in front of it, which is like a Highlander. I can see his roof rack situation. I can see the roof rack situation of the car in front of him. I think it does a pretty good job with the ride. We go over the rough roads, and I think it's pretty good. You do feel it, but it isn't uncomfortable. I don't feel like annoyed by it. And also, the other cool thing is, I'm not really looking like potholes. I wouldn't be really trying to get out of the way of them. It's like, yeah, whatever. I'm surprised how much body roll and vagueness there is to the steering. I don't know that it's necessarily a bad thing, though. I think if you get a car like this, you sort of have to expect it isn't going to handle like a sports car. Whoa! That's pretty quick. That's pretty quick. It's not wildly fast, but it moves. Considering our driving position, you know, when you sit in a vehicle like this, you expect it to have fire truck acceleration. You know, it's interesting. I actually wonder if it drives a little better than the standard G-Wagen, just because we sort of have a wider track. The corners are further apart. It's a little more, you know, well positioned than the standard one. It didn't even look. How can you not? I mean, I don't know. You've had a bunch of crazy cars. You've kind of normalized this. To me, this and the 6x6, I've considered to be maybe two of the craziest cars that have been released in the last 5 years. You really kind of feel like you can, especially at this speed, right? Like, I really feel like I have a lot of passing power. Boy, between the passing power and the driving position, you just own the road in this car. You own the road in this car. Because in a semi-truck, you have the driving position where you feel like you own the road, but you couldn't even keep up with a Hyundai Elantra. And in a G63, you're not that much taller than a regular SUV. My Range Rover about the same height. But in this thing, I got both. And this is the only car like that. Sort of souping up like a semi-truck or something. If you've ever gone to a monster truck event, you've probably looked around and noticed that you aren't exactly surrounded by our nation's elites. But let's be honest, monster trucks are cool, even if you're rich. And now the G-Wagen 4x4 Squared gives the wealthy a chance to have the monster truck experience just like everyone else. And actually, I think that perfectly sums up what this vehicle is. It's a giant $250,000 German-built monster truck for the 1%. And G550 4x4 Squared. It is something. How much is 18 inches? Well, allow me to demonstrate. The bumper. Bye.